The geothermal vent hissed and spat, a plume of scalding steam momentarily obscuring the prefabricated structures clinging to the cavern wall. Elijah Vance shivered, not from the cold, but from the tremor that had just rolled through their fragile sanctuary. Keelam was a restless planet, its icy shell groaning under unseen pressures. He glanced at the seismic monitor, the jagged red line a stark reminder of their precarious existence. Another tremor, stronger than the last. He hoped the KRYLL city, nestled deep beneath the glacial plains, fared better. His fascination with the KRYLL, those enigmatic silicon-based life forms, bordered on obsession. For 3 years, since the Exodus, he'd studied them from afar, analyzing their shimmering cities and deciphering fragments of their bioluminescent language. He longed to understand them, not just for humanity's survival, but for something more, something he couldn't quite articulate. The vent's roar subsided, revealing the cavern's harsh reality, a patchwork of metal and bioluminescent fungi, the only sources of light and warmth in this frozen wasteland. A familiar pang of loneliness tightened his chest. He thought of his parents, lost in the solar flare that had scorched Earth and driven the remnants of humanity to this desolate outpost. He pushed the memory away, focusing on his work. Understanding the KRYLL, maybe even forming an alliance, was their only hope. A flicker of blue light caught his eye. Beyond the vent's shimmering curtain, a figure materialized. Tyler. Her crystalline body, a latticework of shifting light and shadow, seemed to absorb the cavern's glow. She pulsed a soft, ethereal green, a greeting he was beginning to understand. He returned it with a flicker of the bioluminescent patch on his glove, a clumsy but earnest attempt at communication. He knew she was different, alien, but the loneliness of Keelam had a way of blurring the lines between species. There was an understanding in her iridescent gaze that he craved, a connection that transcended words. He offered her a nutrient solution he had synthesized, mimicking the energy signatures detected near the KRYLL city. She hesitated, then extended a delicate, crystalline finger towards the vial. Their fingers brushed. The contact sent a jolt through him, an unexpected spark of warmth in the frigid cavern. He wondered if she felt it too. The ground lurched again, violently this time. Support struts groaned, and chunks of ice rained down from the cavern ceiling. Tyler emitted a pulsating red, fear and urgency intertwined. She pointed towards the glacial plains, her light patterns shifting rapidly. A message he couldn't fully decipher, but the terror in her luminescence was unmistakable. He realized she knew what was happening. She knew the source of these tremors. He had a choice to make: stay with his team, secure the station, or follow Tyler, delve deeper into the mysteries of Keelam and risk everything. He glanced at the photo of his parents tucked into his workstation. Their faces, blurred by the damaged plastic, seemed to urge him towards safety. But Tyler's silent plea, the desperation in her light, pulled him in a different direction. He nodded, his heart pounding against his ribs. He would follow her. He would trust her. He grabbed his gear and followed her into the swirling blizzard, leaving behind the fragile safety of the human settlement and stepping into the unknown, icy heart of Keelam. The blizzard howled, a swirling white chaos that threatened to swallow Elijah whole. Tyler moved through it with an eerie grace, her crystalline form shimmering like a beacon in the storm. He followed, his breath catching in his throat with each gust of icy wind, his bioengineered suit straining against the elements. He knew he was taking a reckless gamble, abandoning his post, chasing a whisper of hope into the frozen unknown. But something in Tyler's desperate plea, the raw emotion conveyed in her shifting luminescence, had compelled him to follow. They reached a crystalline cave, the entrance hidden beneath a curtain of ice. Inside, the air was still and strangely warm. Tyler's luminescence softened, shifting from anxious red to a calming blue. The cave wall shimmered with a faint, internal light, illuminating intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story he couldn't yet understand. He realized he was standing in a KRYLL sanctuary, a place of profound significance. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering hesitantly over one of the crystalline formations. He was suddenly acutely aware of his humanness, his clumsy, flesh and blood form intruding on this alien space. Would his touch contaminate it? Would she understand his reverence? Tyler sensed his hesitation. She placed her delicate, crystalline hand over his, her touch surprisingly warm. A jolt of energy, a mixture of awe and desire, coursed through him. It was more than a physical sensation, it was a connection, a silent acknowledgement of shared vulnerability. He remembered Sarah, his fiancée, lost in the Earth's final, fiery embrace. This touch, this unexpected intimacy with a being so different from himself, stirred a dormant part of his soul, a longing for connection he thought he'd buried with his past. Tyler led him deeper into the cave, her light patterns forming complex symbols he now recognized as KRYLL glyphs. She was telling him a story, a history of her people, their deep connection to Keelam, and the growing threat of the Whispers. He struggled to keep up, his translator struggling to interpret the nuances of her bioluminescent language. But he understood the core of her message: the Whispers were consuming Keelam's energy, destabilizing the planet and threatening both human and KRYLL survival. He showed her his own data, the readings from the seismic monitors, the evidence he'd gathered of the fungal network spreading through the ice. She pulsed a deep violet, a color he hadn't seen before. He realized it was grief, a profound sorrow for her dying world. Suddenly, her light shifted to a sharp, urgent white. She pulled him towards a hidden passage, her movements frantic. She was leading him somewhere important. He followed, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she was entrusting him with something vital, something that could change everything. They emerged onto a vast, subterranean glacier, a shimmering expanse of ice stretching as far as the eye could see. In the distance, a colossal structure pulsed with a malevolent red glow, the heart of the Whispers network. Tyler pointed towards it, then towards a small, pulsating crystal she held in her hand. He understood. She wanted him to take it to the human settlement, to show them the true nature of the threat. It was a dangerous mission, one that could expose her and her people to human aggression. It was an act of faith, a leap of trust that stunned him. He knew what he had to do. He took the crystal, his fingers brushing hers. This time, the contact was not just a spark of warmth, but a surge of shared purpose, a silent promise. He turned to leave, but she held him back, her light pulsing a soft, questioning green. He knew she was asking him to stay, to help her fight for her world. He glanced back at the human settlement, a distant flicker of light in the icy wilderness. He thought of returning home, a dream he'd clung to for so long. He thought of his duty to his people. But then he looked at Tyler, her luminescence reflecting in his eyes, and he knew he couldn't leave her. He couldn't abandon her to this fight alone. He shook his head, a silent farewell to his old life, his old dreams. He was staying. He turned back to Tyler, a small smile forming on his lips. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would face it with her, side by side, in the heart of this frozen, alien world. The crystalline shard pulsed with a sickly red light in Elijah's hand. Tyler had led him to a hidden cavern, a place where the ice thrummed with an unnatural energy. Veins of scarlet light pulsed through the glacial walls, a network far more extensive than he'd initially imagined. He understood now. This wasn't just seismic instability, it was a parasitic organism, feeding on Keelam's geothermal energy, the very lifeblood of the planet. The Whispers. He finally understood the true scale of the threat. He showed Tyler the readings from his scanner, confirming his suspicions. The fungal network was vast, its tendrils reaching deep beneath the ice, towards the KRYLL city and the human settlement. She pulsed a dim violet, a color he now associated with sorrow. He saw a flicker of something else, too: fear. Fear for her people, for their fragile existence on this dying world. He explained his theory, simplifying the complex biological processes to basic concepts she seemed to grasp. The Whispers were consuming Keelam's energy, causing the tremors and destabilizing the planet's delicate ecosystem. He pointed to a section of the ice where the fungal network was particularly dense. "It's spreading," he said, his voice echoing in the cavern. "If we don't stop it, Keelam, it will die." Tyler's light flickered, a complex interplay of colors he struggled to interpret. Then, she did something unexpected. She reached out and touched his face, her crystalline fingers cool against his skin. He flinched, not from the cold, but from the unexpected intimacy. He wondered if his touch, his human biology, could harm her delicate crystalline structure. But her touch lingered, a silent reassurance. He felt a tremor, not from the planet this time, but from within himself. This alien being, so different from him in every way, was showing him trust, offering him comfort in the face of unimaginable fear. The memory of Sarah, his lost fiancée, flashed through his mind, a bittersweet echo of a love lost on a burning world. This moment, this connection with Tyler, felt like a new beginning, a fragile seed of hope in the frozen wasteland of his heart. Tyler pulled her hand away, her light shifting to a determined blue. She pointed towards the human settlement, then to herself, and then back to the pulsating red veins in the ice. He understood. She wanted him to warn his people, to show them the true nature of the threat. It was a dangerous request. Revealing the Whisper's existence could trigger panic, aggression, even an attack on the KRYLL. It was an act of immense trust, a gamble that could cost her everything. He felt a pang of guilt. He'd come to Keelam seeking knowledge, seeking a way to save his own people. He'd never imagined he'd find himself torn between his duty to humanity and his burgeoning feelings for this alien being. He nodded, his throat tight. He would go. He would warn his people. He would try to bridge the gap between two species on the brink of extinction. He touched her hand, a silent promise. The journey back was fraught with danger. The Whisper's activity was intensifying, the ice groaning and shifting beneath his feet. He thought of Tyler, alone in the icy cavern, her faith resting on his shoulders. He thought of the human settlement, his people clinging to life in the geothermal vents. He was caught between two worlds, two futures. He reached the settlement, his body numb with cold, his mind racing. He showed the council the readings, the images of the spreading fungal network. As he'd feared, panic erupted. Some called for an immediate attack on the KRYLL, blaming them for the planet's instability. Others demanded a retreat, a desperate gamble to find another habitable world. He argued against both, his voice hoarse, his heart heavy. He spoke of Tyler, of her trust, of her willingness to risk everything for a chance at peace. He spoke of the Whispers, the true enemy, the threat that loomed over them all. He looked at the faces of his people, their fear and desperation mirrored in his own soul. He knew he couldn't leave. He couldn't abandon Tyler, couldn't abandon the hope, however fragile, of a shared future on this dying world. He made his choice. He relinquished his place on the next Exodus ship, the last chance for humanity to escape Keelam's icy grip. He was staying. He was choosing to fight, not just for survival, but for something more, something he was only beginning to understand. The soft glow of Tyler's bioluminescent veins painted the cavern walls in shifting hues of blue and green. Elijah sat across from her, a chasm of language and biology separating them, yet a fragile bridge of understanding was beginning to form. He had spent the past few days immersed in the KRYLL's complex light patterns, and finally, a breakthrough. He'd isolated repeating sequences, subtle shifts in color and intensity that corresponded to basic concepts. He showed her his findings, mimicking her patterns with a modified bioluminescent patch on his glove. KRYLL, he flickered, then pointed to her. She pulsed a soft green, affirmation. He then flickered, human, and touched his chest. She repeated the gesture, the light pattern surprisingly accurate. A wave of excitement washed over him. He was talking to her, truly communicating. He showed her the crystal shard, the pulsing red heart of the Whispers. He flickered, danger. Keelam. Us. Tyler's light shifted to violet, a hue he was beginning to understand as grief. He realized she wasn't just afraid for her people, she mourned for her planet, for the symbiotic relationship the KRYLL shared with Keelam, a relationship now threatened by the insatiable hunger of the Whispers. A flicker of orange, a color he hadn't seen before. He accessed his translator. Doubt. Guilt. You a doubt, he flickered, trying to interpret her complex emotions. Tyler pulsed a rapid sequence of light, images flashing through his mind, KRYLL elders, disapproval, accusations of betrayal. He understood. She was risking ostracization, even exile, by communicating with him, a human. He placed his hand over hers. He hesitated, the memory of Sarah's warm touch ghosting over his fingers. This was different. Tyler's hand was cool, smooth, almost crystalline. He half expected it to shatter at his touch. But it held firm, her light pulsing a steady blue beneath his palm. He wondered what she felt, if this physical contact held any meaning for her, or if it was just a bizarre, alien custom. He felt a surge of warmth, not just from the contact, but from the shared understanding that flowed between them. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he wasn't just studying her, he was falling for her. But how could a human, flesh and bone, connect with a being of pure light and silicon? How could they bridge the chasm of their different worlds, their different ways of loving? Tyler withdrew her hand and touched the crystal shard, her light flaring brightly. She pointed towards the glacial plains, towards the KRYLL city, then back to him. He understood. She wanted him to accompany her, to meet her people, to plead their case. It was an unprecedented gesture of trust, a dangerous gamble in a time of growing fear and suspicion. He knew he had to do it. He had to try. He was scheduled to leave on the next Exodus ship, a one-way ticket to a new human colony. It was his last chance to escape Keelam, to leave behind the ghosts of his past and start anew. But he couldn't leave Tyler. He couldn't abandon the fragile hope of peace he'd found in her iridescent gaze. He deactivated his Exodus beacon, severing his ties to humanity's future, choosing instead to stay on this dying world, with her. They journeyed across the glacial plains, the air thick with anticipation and fear. As they approached the KRYLL city, a pulsating network of light and crystal, an alarm blared from the human settlement. A red flare illuminated the sky, followed by another, and another. The settlement was under attack. Tyler's light fled a frantic white. He knew, without words, that the Whispers had orchestrated it, manipulating human fear and paranoia to instigate a war. They had to stop it, had to prevent a catastrophe that would doom both their species. He grabbed her hand, ignoring the whispers of doubt in his own mind, and pulled her towards the settlement, the heart of the Whispers pulsing malevolently in the distance. He could see the KRYLL delegation arriving at the human settlement, their lights flickering with confusion and fear as human weapons charged up. Tyler emitted a high-pitched whine, a sound that resonated with the very ice around them. The human weapon sputtered, their energy dissipating harmlessly. It was a KRYLL defense mechanism, something he'd only read about in his research. She was protecting them, protecting the humans who were about to fire on her people. He ran forward, shouting, pleading for reason. He explained the Whispers' manipulation, their true nature, the threat they posed to both humans and KRYLL. He pointed to Tyler, her light pulsating with desperation, with hope. Slowly, hesitantly, the weapons lowered. But the peace was fragile, hanging by a thread. The KRYLL elders, their lights pulsing with suspicion and anger, were demanding Tyler's return. He stood beside her, his hand on her cool, crystalline arm, a silent promise of protection. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, full of mistrust and accusations from both sides. But in that moment, surrounded by chaos and fear, he also felt a quiet refuge in Tyler's presence, in the shared understanding that bloomed between them, a fragile flower in the frozen wasteland of their hearts. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic and language, that this was just the beginning of their story, a story of love and hope in the face of extinction, a story that would determine the fate of two worlds. The heart of the glacier was a cathedral of ice, its vaulted ceilings shimmering with an eerie luminescence. Tyler led Elijah through a labyrinth of crystalline tunnels, the air growing colder with each step. The red veins of the Whispers pulsed around them, a constant reminder of the planet's slow decay. He felt a growing unease, a sense of violation, as though they were trespassing on sacred ground. Tyler stopped at a precipice overlooking a vast chasm. Below, a pulsating mass of scarlet light churned like a malevolent heart, the source of the Whispers. The air vibrated with an unnatural energy, making the hairs on Elijah's arms stand on end. He understood now why the KRYLL had never ventured this deep into the glacier. This wasn't just a source of infection, it was a place of profound, ancient power, a power that both terrified and fascinated him. He saw a flicker of fear in Tyler's light, a vulnerability he hadn't witnessed before. She turned to him, her luminescence shifting to a soft, questioning green. Was she asking for reassurance? Or was it something more, a deeper connection she was seeking, a connection he wasn't sure he could offer? The memory of Sarah, her warm hand in his, the shared laughter under Earth's now scorched sky, tugged at his heart. He was on another world, with another being, facing a different kind of apocalypse. He longed for Sarah's comforting presence, yet the growing warmth he felt towards Tyler was undeniable. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering hesitantly over her crystalline arm. Could his touch harm her, contaminate her with his human biology? He hesitated, the gulf between their species suddenly vast and insurmountable. But she leaned into his touch, her light pulsing a steady blue. The contact sent a shiver down his spine, not from the cold, but from the unexpected intimacy. Her crystalline structure felt cool, smooth, almost otherworldly beneath his fingers. He felt a surge of longing, a desire to understand her, to bridge the gap between their worlds, not just for the sake of survival, but for something more, something he couldn't quite name. Tyler pointed towards the pulsing heart of the whispers, then to a small, crystalline vial she held in her hand. He recognized it, a sample of the symbiotic bacteria used by the humans to survive in Keelam's harsh environment. She was asking him to adapt it, to weaponize it against the whispers. It was a long shot, a gamble that could backfire spectacularly. But it was their only hope. He nodded, his throat tight. He would do it, for her, for Keelam, for the fragile future they were trying to build together. As they turned to leave, the ice beneath them groaned. The chasm widened, a torrent of glacial melt cascading into the depths. Tyler stumbled, her light flaring a frantic white. He grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as the ground gave way. They clung to the edge, the icy wind whipping around them. Below, the heart of the whispers pulsed with renewed vigor, its scarlet light reflecting in their wide eyes. He looked at Tyler, her crystalline form shimmering in the precariously shifting light. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce desire to keep her safe, a feeling that had nothing to do with duty or logic, and everything to do with the burgeoning love he felt for this alien being. He knew, in that moment, that he would sacrifice everything for her, even his own life. They climbed back to the surface, shaken but unharmed. The journey back to the human settlement was tense. The whispers' activity had intensified, the ice groaning and shifting beneath their feet. He felt Tyler's fear, her doubt, her guilt at trusting a human. He tried to reassure her with his touch, with the silent language they were developing, a language of shared vulnerability and hope. As they approached the settlement, they saw a delegation of KRYLL approaching from the other direction. Tyler's light pulsed with a mixture of hope and apprehension. This was it, the moment of truth. Could they bridge the gap between their species, or would fear and suspicion tear them apart? But before they could reach the settlement, alarms blared. Red flares lit up the sky. The settlement was under attack. Not by the KRYLL, but by rogue human factions, manipulated by the Whisper's insidious influence. The negotiations, the fragile hope of peace, shattered in an instant. Tyler's light flared a brilliant white, a cry of anguish. She turned to him, her gaze filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She pointed towards the settlement, then to herself, then to the KRYLL delegation. He understood. She was asking him to choose. To save his people, or to stand with her, to fight for a future where humans and KRYLL could coexist. He looked at the burning settlement, at the KRYLL delegation, their lights flickering with confusion and fear. He thought of his duty to his people, the dream of rebuilding a new home on this alien world. Then he looked at Tyler, her luminescence reflecting in his eyes, her trust radiating towards him like a beacon in the storm. He made his choice. He deactivated his emergency beacon, severing his ties to the human command, choosing instead to stay with her, to fight for the fragile hope they had built together. He grabbed her hand, his heart pounding in his chest. Together, they turned towards the chaos, towards the burning settlement, towards the uncertain future their love a quiet refuge in the heart of the galactic storm. He didn't know if they could survive, if they could bridge the chasm between their species, but he knew he couldn't face the future without her. He knew that their love, however fragile, was the only hope for a new beginning, a new equilibrium on a world teetering on the brink of destruction. The KRYLL city hummed with an alien energy, a symphony of light and crystalline structures that dwarfed Elijah. He felt a tremor of unease, not from the planet this time, but from the sheer alienness of it all. He was the first human to set foot within these shimmering walls, a testament to Tyler's trust, a trust that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He glanced at her, her crystalline form radiating a soft, welcoming blue. He hoped this trust wasn't misplaced. He'd spent the last few days synthesizing a modified version of the symbiotic bacteria, tailoring it to the KRYLL's silicon-based biology. It was a risky gamble, based on a hunch and a few cryptic clues gleaned from Tyler's light patterns. If it worked, it could give the KRYLL a fighting chance against the Whispers. If it failed, it could be disastrous. Tyler led him to a chamber at the heart of the city, where the KRYLL elders awaited. Their crystalline bodies, larger and more complex than Tyler's, radiated a spectrum of colors he was still learning to interpret. He saw curiosity, apprehension, and a deep, underlying suspicion. He knew he had to convince them, not just for the sake of the planet, but for Tyler, for the fragile bond they were forging. He presented his findings, using a combination of KRYLL light patterns and human technology to explain the threat of the Whispers and his proposed solution. He showed them the modified bacteria, explaining its potential benefits and risks. The elders' light patterns flickered with debate, their colors shifting rapidly. He felt a pang of doubt. Was he asking them to trust him, a human, with their very survival? Then, Tyler stepped forward. Her light flared, a brilliant display of colors he'd never seen before. She spoke, her voice a series of crystalline chimes that resonated with the chamber's energy. She was vouching for him, risking her standing within the KRYLL community to defend his plan. He felt a surge of gratitude, a warmth that spread through his chest despite the frigid air. The elders' light pattern shifted again, this time to a cautious green. They agreed to try the modified bacteria, a decision that rested entirely on their trust in him, in Tyler, and in the fragile hope of interspecies cooperation. He began working with the KRYLL scientists, a collaboration unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Their silicon-based biology was a mystery, their technology a blend of organic and crystalline structures that defied his understanding. Yet, there was a shared purpose, a mutual respect that transcended their differences. He found himself drawn to their quiet contemplation, their deep connection to Keelam, a connection he was only beginning to understand. He spent hours in the lab with Tyler, their hands brushing as they worked, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through him. He noticed her hesitation, a subtle flicker of doubt in her light. He knew she was questioning the wisdom of trusting him, of growing closer to a human. He, too, felt the pull of his past, the ghost of Sarah, his lost fiancée, reminding him of the pain of connection, the inevitable loss. He showed her pictures of Earth, of the vibrant green world that had been his home, a world now consumed by fire. He spoke of Sarah, of their dreams, their shattered future. He shared his grief, his vulnerability, with this alien being who was becoming something more than a collaborator, more than a friend. Tyler pulsed a soft violet, a color he now associated with empathy. She showed him images of KRYLL younglings, their crystalline bodies shimmering with playful light. She spoke of her hopes for their future, for a Keelam free from the Whisper's grasp. He saw a reflection of his own dreams in her luminescence, a shared longing for a peaceful future, a future they were fighting to build together. Just as they were making progress, alarms blared through the city. The human settlement was under attack. The Whispers, sensing the growing alliance between humans and KRYLL, had instigated an attack, manipulating rogue factions within the human community to strike first. Tyler's light flared white, a mixture of fear and determination. She grabbed his hand, pulling him towards the exit. He knew he had a choice to make, stay and defend the KRYLL city, or return to the human settlement, to try and stop the fighting. It was a choice between his duty to his people and his loyalty to Tyler, a loyalty that felt stronger than any duty he'd ever known. He looked at Tyler, her iridescent gaze locked on his, her hand gripping his with surprising strength. He saw not just fear but a deep trust, a belief in him, in their shared mission. He knew what he had to do. He activated his emergency beacon, alerting the KRYLL defense systems. Then, he turned to Tyler, his heart heavy. "I have to go," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have to try and stop this." Tyler's light pulsed a sad, understanding blue. She touched his face, her crystalline fingers cool against his skin. It was a farewell, a silent promise of reunion. Then, she released his hand, her light shifting to a determined white as she turned to face the growing chaos within the city. He ran towards the human settlement, the sounds of battle echoing behind him. He knew he was risking his life, not just for his people, but for Tyler, for the fragile dream they shared, a dream of two species united against a common enemy, a dream of love blooming in the heart of a frozen world. He didn't know if he would survive, if they would succeed, but he knew he couldn't abandon her, couldn't abandon the hope they had found in each other's gaze, a hope that burned brighter than any star in the vast, indifferent galaxy. The air within the KRYLL laboratory crackled with nervous energy. Tyler's usual calming blue luminescence flickered with an anxious green as Elijah prepared the modified bacteria. He'd spent sleepless nights adapting the symbiotic organism that sustained human life on Keelam, tailoring it for KRYLL physiology. It was their only hope of combating the Whispers, but a gamble nonetheless. He'd seen the flicker of doubt in the Elders' light patterns, the weight of their people's survival resting on his shoulders, on this untested concoction. "Ready?" he asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous lab. Tyler pulsed a hesitant green. He saw a flicker of something else too, fear. Not just for her people, but for him. She'd risked everything to trust him, a human, and now, that trust was about to be tested. He injected the modified bacteria into a small, pulsating KRYLL crystal. It shimmered, then dimmed, then flared with an intense, unfamiliar light. He held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. It worked. The bacteria was compatible. Relief washed over him, followed by a surge of hope. He glanced at Tyler, her light flaring in response, mirroring his own exhilaration. Their hands brushed as they reached for another crystal. The contact, no longer accidental, sent a wave of warmth through him. He'd become accustomed to her cool, smooth touch, the strange intimacy of connecting with a being so different, yet so familiar. He remembered Sarah, her warm hand in his, the ghost of her touch a bittersweet reminder of a love lost on a dying world. Tyler was different, alien, yet her presence filled a void he thought would forever remain empty. A klaxon blared, shattering the quiet intimacy of the lab. Red lights flashed, casting the crystalline walls in a harsh, urgent glow. The human settlement was under attack. The Whispers, sensing their progress, had struck first. Tyler's light shifted to a frantic white. He knew, without words, that the negotiations with the Human Council, the fragile hope of peace, had crumbled. He had a choice to make: stay and help the KRYLL prepare the bacteria, or return to the human settlement, to try and stop the fighting. "Go," Tyler pulsed, her light a firm, resolute blue. "Save your people." He hesitated. Leaving her, leaving the KRYLL city, felt like a betrayal. But he knew she was right. He had a duty to his people, a duty he couldn't ignore. He activated his emergency beacon, alerting the KRYLL defenses. He turned to Tyler, his heart aching. "I'll be back," he promised, his voice tight with emotion. He touched her face, his bare hand lingering on her cool, crystalline cheek. He half expected her to recoil, to shatter at his touch. But she leaned into it, her light pulsing a steady blue, a silent promise of reunion. Then, she turned and ran towards the heart of the city, her light flaring with a fierce determination he'd never seen before. He ran towards the human settlement, the sounds of battle growing louder with each step. He found chaos. Explosions rocked the cavern walls. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning bioengineered structures. He found his team, outnumbered, outgunned, fighting a desperate battle against their own people, manipulated by the Whisper's insidious influence. He saw the KRYLL delegation, led by Tyler, arriving at the settlement. Their lights flickered with confusion and fear as human weapons targeted them. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was the Whisper's plan all along, to turn humans and KRYLL against each other, to ensure their mutual destruction. Tyler stepped forward, her light flaring a brilliant white. She emitted a high-pitched whine, a KRYLL distress signal, that echoed through the cavern, resonating with the very ice around them. The human weapons flickered, then died. It was Tyler, using her unique connection to Keelam, disabling the weapons, protecting the humans who were about to fire upon her. It was an act of breathtaking courage, an act of faith that defied logic, an act that could have cost her life. He ran towards her, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and awe. "They're being manipulated," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "The Whispers are controlling them." He explained the Whisper's strategy, their ability to tap into fear and paranoia, their insidious plan to turn humans against the KRYLL. Slowly, hesitantly, the weapons lowered. The fighting stopped. But the peace was fragile, hanging by a thread. The KRYLL elders, still wary, still grieving their losses, looked at Tyler, their light patterns flickering with disapproval. She had defied them, had intervened on behalf of the humans, and now, they questioned her loyalty, her sanity. He stepped forward, standing beside Tyler, his hand on her cool, crystalline arm. "She saved us," he said, his voice clear and strong. "She risked her life for us." He knew he was choosing a side, choosing Tyler, choosing a future where humans and KRYLL could coexist, a future that seemed impossibly distant just moments ago. He was giving up his dream of returning to a rebuilt Earth, a dream he had clung to for so long. He was choosing Keelam, choosing Tyler, choosing a love that defied logic and biology, a love that was blooming amidst the chaos, a quiet refuge in the heart of the galactic storm. He didn't know what the future held, whether they could truly bridge the chasm between their species. He knew they would face opposition, condemnation from both sides, from those who clung to old fears and prejudices. But as he looked at Tyler, her luminescence reflecting in his eyes, her hand gripping his with a strength that belied her delicate form, he knew he wasn't alone. He knew their love, however fragile, was a seed of hope, a symbol of a new beginning, a new equilibrium on a world teetering on the brink of destruction. And in that moment, amidst the ruins of their shattered hopes, that was enough. The frozen war had begun. The modified bacteria, deployed across the glacial plains, pulsed with an ethereal blue light, pushing back against the encroaching crimson tendrils of the Whispers. KRYLL warriors, their crystalline bodies shimmering with a newfound strength, fought alongside human soldiers, their bioengineered weapons spitting streams of concentrated bacteria. Elijah, at the forefront of the assault, felt a surge of adrenaline, a grim satisfaction as the red veins of the Whispers recoiled, their malevolent glow dimming. But the Whispers weren't giving up easily. The ice groaned and shifted, unleashing fissures that swallowed soldiers whole. Crystalline shards rained down from the cavern ceiling, impaling humans and KRYLL alike. The air crackled with energy discharges, the battlefield a chaotic symphony of light and sound. Amidst the chaos, Elijah searched for Tyler. He'd seen her leading a KRYLL squadron, her light flaring with a fierce determination he'd never witnessed before. He felt a pang of fear, a selfish desire to pull her from the fray, to shield her from the carnage. But he knew she wouldn't retreat, wouldn't abandon her people, wouldn't abandon him. He saw her fighting near the heart of the Whispers network, her light pulsing a desperate white. He pushed through the swirling snow and ice, his bioengineered suit straining against the elements, his heart pounding with a terrifying premonition. He reached her just as a massive ice shard, dislodged by a tremor, plummeted towards her. He shoved her aside, the impact throwing him against the icy wall. He felt a searing pain in his side, his breath catching in his throat. He looked down, his hand coming away stained with crimson. Human blood. Tyler knelt beside him, her light pulsing a frantic violet. He'd never seen her so emotional. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. Her crystalline surface felt cool, smooth, a stark contrast to the burning heat spreading through his side. He wanted to say something, to tell her how much she meant to him, how much he loved her, but the words caught in his throat. He saw a flicker of understanding in her luminescence, a depth of emotion he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just concern, it was grief. He realized that his touch, his human fragility, had made her understand the true cost of this war, the pain of loss that both their species were enduring. She placed her hand over his wound, her light pulsing a soft, healing blue. The pain subsided, the bleeding slowing. He knew it was a temporary fix, a desperate attempt to keep him alive. She looked at him, her luminescence shifting to a resolute green. She pointed towards the heart of the Whispers network, then to herself, then to him. He understood. She was asking him to stay, to fight alongside her, to finish what they had started. He nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He wouldn't leave her. He couldn't. He'd given up his chance to escape Keelam, had severed his ties to humanity's future, to be with her, to fight for this fragile dream they shared. He loved her, this alien being, this creature of light and silicon, with a fierceness that surprised even himself. He loved her more than his duty, more than his past, more than his own life. Together, they turned towards the heart of the Whispers, their hands clasped, their lights merging in a symphony of blue and green, a beacon of hope amidst the frozen wasteland. The war wasn't over, but they were together, and in that moment, that was all that mattered. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges, with the potential for condemnation from both their peoples. But their love, however fragile, was a seed of change, a symbol of a new beginning, a new equilibrium, a quiet refuge in the heart of the galactic storm. The Whispers were contained, their crimson network receding from the glacial plains, leaving behind a scarred but healing Keelam. The frozen war had ended, but the true battle, the struggle for understanding and acceptance, was just beginning. Elijah sat beside Tyler, overlooking the ravaged human settlement, a patchwork of damaged structures and flickering bioluminescent fungi. The air was still thick with the acrid smell of burned biotech, a stark reminder of the devastation wrought by fear and manipulation. He glanced at Tyler, her crystalline form radiating a soft, melancholic violet. He'd learned to read her luminescence, to understand the nuances of her silent language, but the depths of her emotion still remained a mystery. He knew she grieved for the KRYLL lost in the conflict, for the damage inflicted upon her world. He, too, mourned the human casualties, the shattered hope of a swift return to a rebuilt Earth. He'd relinquished that dream, traded it for a future on this frozen world, a future with her. "It's over," he said, his voice barely a whisper, the words echoing the hollow ache in his heart. Tyler pulsed a dim blue, acknowledgement tinged with doubt. He knew she was questioning the fragility of the peace, the deep-seated prejudices that still lingered within both their communities. The Human Council, while grateful for the KRYLL's intervention, viewed the alliance with suspicion, their fear of the unknown outweighing their gratitude. The KRYLL elders, though acknowledging Tyler's courage, condemned her closeness with a human, her willingness to bridge the divide between their species. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers tracing the smooth, cool contours of her crystalline structure. It was a gesture of comfort, of solidarity, a silent affirmation of their bond. He felt a tremor, not from the planet this time, but from within himself. This touch, this connection with a being so different from him, was a refuge, a quiet harbor in the storm of their shared trauma. He remembered Sarah, his lost fiancée, her warm hand in his, the ghost of her touch a bittersweet reminder of a love lost on a burning world. Tyler was different, alien, yet her presence filled a void he thought would forever remain empty. Tyler's light pulsed a steady blue, a silent acceptance of his touch, his comfort. He wondered what she felt, if this physical contact held the same meaning for her, or if it was just a bizarre, alien custom. He was learning her language, her ways, but the chasm between their species, their cultures, their very understanding of love, still felt vast and unbridgeable at times. He saw a flicker of green in her luminescence, a question forming in her silent language. He focused, trying to decipher the complex patterns. She was asking about his world, about Earth, about the humans who had come to Keelam, refugees from a dying star. He showed her images of Earth, its vibrant oceans, its lush green forests, a world that now existed only in memory. He spoke of Sarah, of their shared dreams, of the future they'd planned, a future stolen by the sun's fiery embrace. He shared his grief, his vulnerability, with this alien being, this creature of light and silicon, who had become his confidant, his lover, his hope. Tyler pulsed a soft violet, empathy radiating from her crystalline form. She showed him images of the KRYLL homeworld, a crystalline planet orbiting a distant blue star, a world they'd left behind centuries ago in search of a new home. She spoke of her people's longing for a place to belong, their deep connection to Keelam, their determination to protect it from the Whisper's insatiable hunger. He saw a reflection of his own longing in her luminescence, a shared desire for a peaceful future, a future they were fighting to build together, against all odds. He knew their union would face opposition, condemnation from both their peoples, from those who clung to old fears and prejudices. He knew their path wouldn't be easy, but as he looked at Tyler, her light reflecting in his eyes, her hand gripping his with a strength that belied her delicate form, he knew he wasn't alone. He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers, the cool, smooth surface of her crystalline structure a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. It was a gesture of intimacy, of shared vulnerability, a silent promise of a future together. He didn't know what that future held, whether they could truly bridge the chasm between their species, but he knew he couldn't face it without her. Their love, however fragile, was a seed of change, a symbol of a new beginning, a new equilibrium on a world teetering on the brink of destruction. And in that moment, amidst the ruins of their shattered hopes, in the quiet refuge of their love, that was enough. The galactic storm raged on, but within their shared sanctuary, a new dawn was breaking, a dawn of interspecies understanding, a dawn of love.